Hello, I'm Nicola James, psychologist and CEO of Lexxic. Today I'm interviewing Jeff Gillbert. Jeff Gillbert is a business coach and works with a lot of entrepreneurs, and he also helped me when I founded my business 10.5 years ago. Hi Jeff.
Hi Nicola.
Can you explain a bit more about your experience of working with entrepreneurs and businesses?
I've spent 54 years in business myself. I left school when I was 16 and went straight into business. So none of my last 10 years as a business advisor has come out of books. It all came out of experience of working in my own entrepreneurial companies and working for large corporations at senior management level. So nothing was textbooks, it was all experience. And when I started working as a business advisor, which I had no idea I was going to do, it just happened by accident, I found that those 54 years of working were incredibly invaluable.
I bet.
And that when people asked me a question, surprisingly I knew the answer, which was very useful. And I particularly knew what not to do, because I've had companies that have been very successful, and I've had companies that were not successful. And having companies that are not successful is very good for experience for a business advisor.
I bet.
So one of the things you should do in business is not be afraid of failure.
And what types of businesses have you worked with?
Mainly over the last 10 years I've worked with creative businesses, music, television, film, fashion, and also restaurants and catering, because I like to eat and drink.
Lovely. And I know that some of the creative people that I've met can have wonderful ideas, but some of the statistics shows, like within the world of arts, within the world of a lot of creative professions, you can find that there's quite a lot of neurodiversity, i.e. people with dyslexia. Have you ever worked with people, apart from myself, who have dyslexia or maybe show signs but don't necessarily know they have it?
I've worked with a lot of people with dyslexia, and it's easy for me these days to spot it. I know that sounds sort of quite pretentious, but I get clients coming in, particularly in the design area, like fashion designers and filmmakers, and we'll start talking about the business, and I can recognise within the first hour of talking that they have some issues. And sometimes I ask them outright, are you dyslexic? And they'll think it's quite amazing that I've come to that conclusion so quickly. And sometimes others will say, I've always thought I was, but I don't really know, I've never been assessed.
I bet.
And the giveaway is when you put some figures in front of people, and they will say, I'm really good at making clothes, or I'm really good at shooting movies, or I'm really good at making a piece of music, but I can't read the figures. When I look at a piece of paper, they don't mean anything to me. And it's at that point you realise that you have to design strategies that will work for them. Because one of my mantras is you have to be innovative and creative, but you also have to take care of your finances. And if you don't do all of those three things, you're not giving yourself a chance.
Definitely.
So one of the things I do is help creative people and people with neurological disorders, is that right?
Neurological differences,
Neurological differences. I create ways that it makes it easier for them to control their finances and understand what the figures are, and feel not afraid of having a business that has a financial side to it, because they can't cope with it, so you make it easy for them.
What ways do you do that?
Well, it takes a while to get into it, but setting up templates that I make them become used to using by insisting that they keep on doing it, and going through it with them until it will click eventually, and they'll go, I understand that, and then they begin to enjoy it. It becomes an enjoyable part of the business. You know, when you first realised that you can look at cash flow and understand how much money you've made and what you've spent it on and all the rest of it, it's fantastic for people who don't have the ability to do that normally.
Yeah.
And I try and work with more visual representations as well.
Yeah, that's really good. And I know that one of the ladies we met through our connections was Beatwoven, when she had the fantastic idea of, you know, taking the mathematical beats of music and weaving it into fabric.
Yeah.
And we talked, and she has dyslexia, and she's appeared in our newsletter. And, you know, she's now in Harrods, she's now in some of these amazing stores where she has fabrics that may have been, you know, David Bowie notes that are woven into these beautiful pieces of fabric. And I know that when I came to see you, I was quite unconfident about my dyslexia, but I had a lot of ideas. One of the things that I know I found challenging was proofreading and getting my thoughts down on the page. Is that something you've also found with people that struggle with the written word?
Writing a business plan is, for people with dyslexia or neurological differences, is very challenging. So again, I break it down into little big pieces so that it's much easier to deal with, and I'm aware that you can use different colours that register better, and we'll use those, so that it doesn't become so challenging. If you see a whole sheet of paper that, you know, and your business plan is 27 pages long, then you really will find it very difficult if you break it down into little sections. And also if you do it more visually, because nowadays you can have things like pitch decks, which are a visual representation with infographics, which are bar charts and other graphic examples of what your business plan is, and it's much easier.
That's
and
so
I've
good.
moved more to that way with people with neurological differences.
And that's what I find we do with our business, is very much looking at the accounts through pictures and graphs.
Yeah.
The more visual it is, the more I can just look at it and understand it. Otherwise I find I'm having to force myself with the detail, which sometimes can sort of be quite straining in a way for my short-term memory. You talk about people and the struggles they have, but I imagine that there's sorts of creativity that come through for people who are dyslexic and people who don't know they're dyslexic. There's quite a lot of studies that show there's a high percentage of entrepreneurs who have dyslexia. Have you found that some of the most creative ideas have come from people who show signs of a neurodiverse condition?
Absolutely. I find that my most creative clients usually border on having neurological differences, if not completely immersed in them. And it makes a huge difference because they think differently. One of the other things I always do with my clients when I'm working with them, when we say, okay, you've got dyslexia, we say, well, it's nothing to worry about. This can be a big advantage in your business. Because you will look at things differently than everybody else.
Definitely. And
you'll make jumps that other people won't. And other people quite often will be afraid of taking that jump, and you won't, because you'll see where it's going and you'll go for it. And it is a big advantage to a certain degree. So I've got designers, I've got people who own gyms, I've got people who own a chain of pubs, who had issues, but they were very challenging, and they challenged themselves, and they moved quickly, exactly the same as you.
And I know one thing.
And they're brave.
Absolutely. And I know one thing that I'd never realised when I started my business out, and maybe I didn't have anything to compare it to, but I realised I can see the bigger picture. I'm quite good at critically thinking and mapping forwards. But I know when I wanted to start my business, I was actually quite scared. Because I think sometimes when you've got a neurodiverse condition, when you're comparing yourself externally to the grades that you get, and you're not meeting the grades that society expects you to get, you sometimes can say, I'm not good enough, I don't believe in myself. And so when you want to create something like a business, sometimes people can be hesitant to do that, even though they've got a good idea, because they don't have the esteem, or they might think they'll fail because they might have seen that pattern before in other subjects at school. What advice would you give them to help people have the confidence to step forward and be brave enough to start the journey?
Well, one of the things you have to do is you have to find somebody to mentor you, unfortunately, there are an enormous amount of mentors
Yeah.
who are not that good
Yeah.
and who won't recognise any neuro differences. They won't have any way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
You have to find somebody who understands what you do, and this is probably a selfish thing, but has experience from being in business across a broad range of businesses, rather than having studied business and got a degree in business. You can't be a mentor and advise unless you've been at the coalface and you've done a lot of these things.
Yeah.
So it's always best if you can find somebody that you can bounce off and that can, because one of the things I do is I create an atmosphere for people where they can feel confident about what they're doing and take risks. Because again, if you don't take risks as an entrepreneur, you're probably not going to be successful.
I know that when I started out, one of the things that really helped me to go out and set my business up and get advice was to be able to look online and look at people that were sort of talking about having set a business up before, having run a business before. So I read like Richard Branson's book, who's got dyslexia, on his journey and how he thought differently. And what I found is that the stories these people were telling in school reminded me of me, but it actually gave me the confidence to go, well, he sounds a bit like me, so maybe if I can do it, then if he can do it, maybe I can do it too. So trying to find someone online or someone you look up to who's succeeded to almost give you the confidence and study their journey.
Yeah, I mean, you can get that from reading books from entrepreneurs who've been successful. And there's lots of those books around. You can get it from finding the right advisor, which you have to do quite a bit of research on. Don't be afraid of going, no, I don't think you're good enough. You know, if you don't understand what I'm saying to you, then I'm going to get somebody else.
Definitely.
But once you meet somebody who you feel comfortable with, whose advice makes sense and recognises what your issues are, and deals with them in a sensible way that assists you in getting your strategy onto a piece of paper that is probably quite brilliant, but you can't get it down into a plan that has structure in it, that you can give to a bank manager who says, yes, I understand that. Definitely. Because you know in your head exactly what it is, but it's transferring it from your head into a piece of paper where you can give it to a third party who you're asking money for, or you saying, is this a good idea? It's being able to get it to that stage.
One of the things I'd always thought it would be an all or nothing step, and one of my friends from school, her husband is setting up a business, and he was asking me these journeys about setting up, what my experience was and what my advice. And one of the things I told him, and this is what I thought when I first set my business up, was it's not about going from A to Z, it's not all or nothing. What you can do sometimes is you can say, have a part-time job, start to work on the business in the backgrounds at the weekends, start to build it up. And so you still have income coming in, but you're gradually taking on that journey, work out what the most sellable product is in terms of easy to get to market, people understand it, so you can start to build a base income and build from that. Because I remember when I set my business up, I remember thinking it was all or nothing. And actually when I started to think about the fact that you can do it as a journey, you can build it up, you can gradually start to make money, you don't necessarily have to jump in full-time and have all those full-time commitments of the financial and not having the money come in, made a huge difference, because it made me realise that I can do it at my own pace, I'm not neglecting my needs of being able to pay my rent, etc. And it really gave me the confidence that I could go on this journey without having to commit so much, or so much of my time, or maybe not being able to afford stuff if it didn't work. What advice have you got on that?
That principle is called the lean startup principle.
Okay.
And it's where you say, just start. Whatever you can do, just start. Don't worry about starting, even if it's like you say, I'm only going to do it at weekends. I can't commit much money to it. This is the idea. Get started. Because I guarantee you, as it grows, what you originally thought at the beginning it was going to be,
Yeah.
it will change to something else in the
Totally.
process.
Yeah.
And you have to be adaptable to go, do you know what, I think I'm going to do this now. And because I'm sure when we started out, or you started out,
Yeah.
what you had in your head about what you were going to do
I know.
changed so many times
I know.
over the course of the last 10 years.
And one of the things I actually did is I remember calling my business Lexxic, and the reason I called it Lexxic was so that I wasn't constrained if it did grow beyond dyslexia, which it has. And now we've got our e-learning platform, Neurotalent Unlocked. It's taking a much more digital sort of life in terms of how the products we do. We do phone-based services. And I'm so pleased that in the title I didn't constrict myself to something, which allowed it to grow and flow. And things like having a mailing address in London, having an 0845 number made me look so much bigger than I was. I attracted these big clients and stuff. So, no, absolutely. I from where it was to where it is now, I never would have thought. I just thought I was going to do something I loved. I never realised I'd have staff around me. It's amazing.
But that is what you do. You just get started. Don't be afraid of it. And you will learn as you grow the company what you need to do.
Definitely. And I think one of the most valuable things I learned is that having my first employee, Vicky, work for me, where she has a lot of strengths, which are my difficulties. And actually having somebody that supports you but has different ways of learning and has different skills allowed me to grow the business more, because she could do the stuff I found hard, like the proofreading, etc. She was really good at managing people, and I like managing people, but I also like to create. So it was just a really nice combination, and I found by finding other people who had different skills to me or were better than me at certain things, it made the business grow because people enabled each other with their strengths and they were different, and therefore it helped the business evolve as where it is today. It's amazing.
That's all part of delegation.
Yeah.
And it's recognising what your skills are and what skills you don't have.
Yeah.
And then going out into the marketplace and getting the skills that you don't have.
Yeah.
And adding them into the mix.
Yeah.
But again, you have to be brave to do that, because you have to say, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. I need somebody to do that.
Yeah.
And as long as you can face up to those things.
Yeah.
If you're confident, then you will be able to deal with that.
Yeah.
Because eventually you're going to have to delegate more and more if your business
Definitely.
is successful.
Yeah, and you have to learn to let it go and trust in the people you recruit.
Yeah.
And that's why recruitment of the right people is so important. But that's the
hard. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt. That's the hardest part, is the transition from what your business is to managing people.
Yeah.
Because your business, what it is, just goes on along. And as you get more and more people, your managing of people becomes the biggest part of your business.
Yeah.
And everything else runs underneath it.
Yeah.
Taken care of by the people. And managing people is the most difficult part of any business.
Definitely. And so if I was sitting here 10 years before as a budding entrepreneur but had maybe more fear about taking the first step, what advice would you give me? If I've got a brilliant idea, I'm dyslexic, I'm not sure what to do, what advice would you give me?
I don't know, that's a difficult question to ask. I'd have to know the person, I'd have to spend time with them, I'd have to look at their options, I'd discover what their strengths were and what they were afraid of and what they were confident about, and I'd look at the business model, and then we just work on it together.
So basically,
I can't really say, well, you do that, and it'll all be okay.
No, so basically it's around that person seeking help, seeking advice, and going out there and discussing it with more people who understand it, so they can get a better idea of if it's for them or where they start.
Absolutely. Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for talking to me today. Thank you for watching. This has been Nicola James from Lexxic. Bye-bye.
Bye.